Hi, I'm Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio. Today's video is part 2 of making an applique quilt with vintage fabrics, and today I am doing the quilting on this quilt. I'm starting with the outer border and quilting in a cabbage rose, and this is a really quick, easy, free-flowing design. You start with a hook and then you swing out with half circles going around that hook, and you can put in as many layers of these circles or petals as you want, and I'm just doing 2 layers of petals and filling in spaces in between each hook. Now you can measure these out and make them evenly spaced across your border, but I'm doing this freehand and it's turning out really well for me. I was able to get a full rose right there in the corner. But you can mark those out however you like, whatever your favorite marking method is, and quilt a rose in each section. Now I like borders and sashings where I do not have to turn the quilt. I avoid turning the quilt as much as I can, and this design, this cabbage rose, is one where I don't need to turn the quilt to get to the side borders. It just flows right down the side there without any effort, and it's just real easy to get your side borders done. So you can start in your upper left hand corner and just go all the way around that quilt and get that done. If you like to stop and just do the section of the quilt that you can see and do all your quilting there, well then of course you would have to stop and start, but that isn't necessary with this pattern. Now for the inner border I'm doing L's and E's, and that's a real simple border, but it has a real pretty effect. It's almost a filigree effect. It looks like a frame around your quilt when you get this quilted in. So they're just loops. You start with a large loop and then you follow it with a small loop. And in the corner I put 3 large loops in there. Now you can also mark this with Stencil Designs with Lines has a set of stencils that range in sizes, which is real good to use for marking spacing on your borders, or you can measure it out with a tape measure or a ruler and you can get those L's and E's perfectly spaced. Now for the butterfly wings, I wanted to do something different from the original vintage quilt. In that vintage quilt I quilted in feathers, and in this one I wanted to quilt swirls. So at the top of the butterfly, where the wing is the largest, I quilted in 2 swirls, each one going in a different direction, and then on the outside of the butterfly wing you can see where there are 3 scallops. So in each scallop there is another swirl. So when I get done with one side, I just follow up the side of the butterfly body and then quilt the other side so I don't have to stop and break thread. So this is a real cute, dainty looking design, and it gets enough coverage, I believe, for a baby quilt. Baby quilts don't need to be heavily quilted, I don't believe. Now on the previous video I mentioned that I am doing several of these quilts for the same friend, and we're putting in the baby's name in the quilt somewhere. And this quilt I'm putting it in the sashing. Since the sashing is a solid fabric, the quilting will show up. So to do that I just draw it in by hand using an air-soluble marker, and I'm putting in the baby's name and the year of birth, and this is in the center of the quilt. So this quilt has 4 rows of blocks, so this is the sashing between the second and the third row of blocks. So when I quilt the name in, I just follow exactly what I've drawn out and just take my time and then just follow that handwriting there. And you can make this as fancy or as simple as you like. I'm doing it in just my own handwriting because that's familiar to me, and that's something that I can do fairly quickly. Now once I get her name done, I'm going to break thread and then I'm going to quilt the numbers. So if you are printing your text or if you're using numbers, one way you can get them to flow number to number or letter to letter without breaking thread is to connect them at the bottom. And that's what I'm doing with the year of this baby's birth, which is 2016. So the letters are all being connected at the bottom, and so it makes it just one pass and then I can get all of that done. Now another trick that you can do for quilting text in your sashing is to write your text ahead of time on a piece of adding machine tape. That'll help you with your spacing, and you can then find the center of your adding machine tape and the center of your quilt and get it all lined up, and then copy that text onto your sashing with a marker, air soluble or water soluble, whichever one that you prefer. And it's just a little handy tool to use. Now here I'm filling in the rest of that sashing with another cabbage rose. And this is a smaller one. This one only has 3 petals on it, so I make my hook and then 3 little petals. And then the next hook I'm flipping the other direction, so I'll have one rose that is facing upward and then the next one will face downward, and that gives a little extra motion to the design here. And I think it's real dainty, and it's a real pretty design for a little girl's quilt, or just any quilt that you want a little dainty design in. And here in the vertical sashing I'm doing the same design, and this is another design that you can do without having to turn your quilt to get it in. You can do that vertically on all your sashing. And for the background, I'm using a stencil. This is Designs with Lines Stencil by Pam Clark, and this is the 1-inch stencil, and I'm marking every couple of inches along the lines of this stencil, and they're going vertically. And I'm going to use that as a guideline to help keep my quilting design straight. So I don't want this to be slanting, I want it to be fairly straight. Design that I'm quilting in here is a Serpentine Stitch, and this is a narrow one. I'm not doing a real wide stitch, but it's going pretty fast, and I have the machine is on regulated mode here. But I'm going down to the applique and then traveling along the edge of that applique to the next marked line, and then serpentine stitching up to the border and traveling along the ditch and then back down to the applique. So it goes pretty quick, and I think it gives a lot of texture and motion to the background of this quilt. So this is just a simple and effective background quilt that you can put in a quilt, and I think it works well with a quilt that is using some vintage fabrics from the 1930s and 40s. And even though it's not a design that you probably would see in a vintage quilt, I think it plays well with these fabrics. So the next thing that I quilted on this quilt was the butterfly body and the antennas, and I used my Handy Quilter Versatool to mark where I wanted the antennas, how far out I wanted them, and then used that template to do the quilting in there. And just this quilting stitching is doubled over, so I went from the tip of the butterfly out to the end of the antenna and then back down to the body of the butterfly, the tip of the butterfly. And for the little body, I've switched colors, just like I did with the antenna. This is a YLI thread. The color is dark yellow, which is their black. And for the quilting, I'm just doing some horizontal stitching, and the stitch is about 3/8 of an inch apart. I'm using my hopping foot, which is a 1/2 inch diameter hopping foot. I'm using that as a guideline. So that's about it for this video. I hope you enjoyed it, and if so, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and thanks for watching.